Hello, hello. Welcome. I'm Steph, aka Literati Medium, and today I have
Pete.
from Ponderings of Pete. It's been a while since I've been live, so excuse any social awkwardness. But today we're going to do some reading sprints because I have been very lazy with my physical reading. How about you, Pete?
Mostly just this last week, I haven't been reading as much as I probably should be, considering the size of my TBR, but it's fine.
Yeah, I've definitely been in the middle of doing a readathon. I don't know, are you a member of the SFF Oasis readathon?
Maybe? I'm in so many, but I can guarantee you I'm not active in it if I am actually a member of it.
Yeah, it's they're doing a readathon called Ready Player Read, where it's basically a big bingo board and you have different prompts you have to try and fulfill. And
Hey,
I
Pete.
have been yes. Pete says, "Hi Pete, I'm Pete."
Another one.
Yeah, so today we're just gonna do some reading sprints, or if you don't feel like reading and want to join us, pick a project that you've been putting off and you can do that. So first, I'll tell you, I guess, what I'm reading. So I am currently reading 20th Century Ghosts by Joe Hill, which has since been rebranded as The Black Phone. It got republished as The Black Phone because the movie came out. Short story anthology of horror. And so far, I'm liking it a lot. There was one story that just reaffirmed how I am not a body horror person. I do not enjoy body horror at all, but all the other stories I've really liked. What are you reading, Pete?
I'm kind of wondering how they rebrand a short story anthology due to a movie adaptation coming out. Did they adapt one of the short stories so they rebranded the anthology?
No, so what they did is they republished it, like they did like another edition, and then they
Mm-hmm.
made the cover the Black Phone, and it's called the Black Phone Stories, and then it has like a little tagline that says previously published as 20th Century Ghosts. So I
But
haven't opened that edition to see if the stories are different at all, but I figure it's probably the same stories, but maybe a different forward.
makes sense. But you said there was a movie that came out?
Yes. I'm planning on doing a book versus adaptation
Mhm.
for the Black Phone. It's a horror story that has Ethan Hawke as the main villain.
Just Ethan
And
Hawke.
yeah, he was
Or are
the
you
only
talking
one
about
who
in the movie?
in the movie.
Oh, okay. Okay, I thought this was like
Oh,
they wrote the villain as I'm gonna
bro,
make the villain Ethan Hawke just cause.
uh, no,
Okay.
Ethan Hawke is definitely like not Ethan Hawke the villain.
That'd be so true. And then all of a sudden they some film director picks it up and is like, oh, they made Ethan Hawke the villain. Guess who I'm gonna get to play Ethan Hawke? Ethan
Ethan
Hawke.
Hawke. Well, especially since Ethan's been playing a lot of villains because he was the villain in, or well, I guess spoilers, but you find that out in the first episode. But he was the villain in Moon.
Moon Knight, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, and even in the trailer, it's kind of obvious. It's classic cult villain.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but the premise of the Black Phone, the movie, is that um, a kid wakes up in a cellar where he has been abducted, and there's nothing in it except for a black phone.
Wonderful.
And at night, the phone rings, and he's able to talk to his abductor's previous villain or previous victims.
Interesting.
Yeah, I went to go see the movie the week after it came out. It released last month, and I will say I went into it like with you know hesitation, I guess, not hesitation, but not very many
Mhm.
expectations. Um, and I was really, really pleasantly surprised. It gave me more like thriller vibes, but with like a horror element. It reminded the style was very similar to like It Chapter One movie, the
Okay.
movie, you know? And there was a moment where you're just going like cheering for this kid. And I was like, this is real dark, but I'm really excited about it.
I can
But
understand.
yeah, yeah. But if you like horror, you should go see the movie and maybe read 20th Century Ghosts, aka the Black Phone stories.
I can't say I am. I've never seen it or anything like that, or read a complete Stephen King book, but
Well, this is Joe Hill.
oh my. I might have to pick
Yeah,
him up eventually just because everybody likes him, but it's a eventually thing. Eventually when I feel like it.
yeah.
Fitting it
Hey,
in somewhere.
yeah. So, what are you reading?
I am reading the third book in a series. It's called
Oh,
The Price of Valor by Jango Wexler. It's a flintlock fantasy. This is
okay.
one that I'm technically ahead of the read along for Library of Alexandria's read along. I'm ahead of where we are, but right on time to where we were supposed to be essentially. But
Mm,
this is heavily based on the French Revolution and Napoleon, um, but fantasy. And there's this whole essentially like magical spies, magical assassins, magical cults side plot that's all happening amidst all the craziness that is fantasy French Revolution,
okay.
but not
So,
called
is it
France, obviously.
so it's almost like a historical fantasy?
It feels a lot like that,
Okay.
but
But it's not
again, all the names are changed. The
okay.
dichotomies are different. There's not necessarily a one to one, um, like all the countries around fantasy France and some of the other stuff going on. There isn't necessarily always a one to one connection to real world um, countries, and then the events, of course, aren't like blow for blow the French Revolution, but there's a lot of similar movements.
That's really cool. So you're on the third book. So which so far has been your favorite of the three books?
The first one for certain, because he writes the military side of things really well. Like it focuses, like there's a really great tactician character who is technically one of the main characters, though you don't really have POVs from him. Um, I'm liking some of the villains a little bit more. Well, he does one particular type of smart character well, and then when he tries to write other smart characters, it tends to fall in his face, especially when you have two smart characters going against each other. One inevitably is going to look really dumb, and that's what kind of
Mm,
what happened in the second one, where there was a villain that was touted to be very smart, and it just kind of fell flat for me. Or he
yeah.
felt flat for me as like a, oh no, he almost felt more comical to me than he felt conniving.
Do you think that might be a case of, the way the author's own intellect works, like that maybe they write someone who thinks very similarly to the way they think versus writing someone who thinks very differently from the way they think?
I'm not sure because the way the tactician is written is
Mhm,
very off the page, right? So
mhm,
you don't necessarily see all the smart things that are happening, but you learn it after the fact. And I think that is much
mhm,
easier to write than trying to show the thought process. And that's where what you're talking about would actually play into everything is if you're seeing the
mhm,
thought process. And I think that's why a lot of people will a lot of the people that I know didn't like Lies of Locke Lamora
mhm,
because a lot of those people told from what I've heard didn't like it because um, he's touted to be smart, but they didn't feel he came across as very smart.
Mm.
And I think that's what happened there is like it's hard to write somebody like it sounds like I'm insulting the author's intelligence.
I
I'm sorry, Scott Lynch. I'm not. I'm just
Right. Like we're not this is just like a writing craft thing. It's
yeah.
just me being curious and then I got you down a rabbit hole. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, there's this is something that I've started thinking about before. So
Mhm.
it's a rabbit hole. Like it's really hard to get into some but like it's really hard to get into the head of somebody who thinks a lot different than you, essentially.
Mhm.
So
Right, because we're used to our own inner monologues, right?
mhm. Yeah, I'm
So,
used to having 7 different like 6 or 7 different random thoughts popping through my head and having
mhm.
tangents and layered things and having a conversation about think going on while my brain's going off another different way. I'm used to that. I know that's not how
Mhm.
other people think.
Yeah, I've been getting used to that as well. Yeah, I've had this moment of wait, so everybody doesn't think that way, you
Yeah.
know? Thinking off in tangents where this stream of consciousness makes total sense for me, but
Mhm.
me randomly asking you, like, why do bees buzz when we're talking about something completely different? There was a train of thought there, you
Yeah, yeah,
know?
yeah. Or, like, have you ever, like, made a joke off the tangent that your brain has taken, and then you realize
Mhm.
the other person wasn't along for the ride, so the joke doesn't land whatsoever?
All the time, all the time.
It's just like, "Oh, wait, I forgot. You can't hear what I'm thinking, or else it would be funny, I promise."
Right.
It's
I was like,
related. It's, like, 4 steps down the line related, but it's related, I promise you.
yeah, yeah. Anytime I'm talking to my sister and that happens, and I'll be like, so I know this seems random, but there's a reason. She's like, I've been living with you your entire life. I know. But yeah, yeah. Ah, the joys.
Mhm.
Well, and kind of going back because I'm circling back because I'm still thinking about it.
Let's circle back to this later. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Circling back to the intellect question. So I have sometimes a problem with what you said, like that, the plans are off the page.
Mhm.
I think it can be executed really well, you know? Uh, I sometimes struggle. So I was reading, um, I mean, I was reading the Throne of Glass series, right?
Yay.
And
It's been a while. I
like
barely
I
remember
enjoyed the
anything.
series. I
Yeah.
enjoyed the series. I would probably reread it, but like there was definitely like the last few books where Sarah J. Maas was doing this thing where all of a sudden it was like, surprise, I've been working on this the whole time. And I was like, where? Where were you working on this? How were you working on this? When did this happen? And I was just like, my
Yeah.
brain did not take that leap, like could not take that leap because I was like, based on the things that have been happening in this story,
Mhm.
when would she have done this?
Yeah, and I think that's the difference between Deus Ex Machina and proper foreshadowing.
Mhm,
So, the difference between the first book and the second book in this series is I felt like proper foreshadowing because in the first book, there were plans and you could actually tell that, like, the in specific things that what's his face that the strategist, the smart guy, was doing things. And the other thing that is important, in this book, he was shown to be fallible, and he admits to being fallible. Not just, "Oh, I could be," not just saying, "Oh, I could be whatever," but it's shown that, "Oh, yeah, he screwed up because something else," because best laid plans, right? Best laid plans
mhm,
always go awry.
right,
And so having a tactician character, there's A, laying down the plans and foreshadowing the plans properly in advance so that what you were saying, like you couldn't make the leap from, oh, they were planning this the entire time. Like
mhm,
there has to be some sort of thing that shows that the reader can pick up on. It's you have to treat it like a mystery, right? You have
mhm,
to lay the groundwork for it, and basically have it so that the reader can figure out some at least something in advance or see that something's going on and then follow through. And then if something goes awry, it's okay to say that the person, oh, I didn't anticipate this, but I'm going
mhm.
to adapt to it and overcome it anyways.
Yeah.
So whether
Yeah,
it
I get.
be yeah, whether it be through like, oh, I kind of like suspected something like that might happen, so I put in a contingency because contingencies are
Mhm,
great if
mhm.
laid the proper way again. But like, yeah, adaption.
Do you think that's also a difference between, like, a plotter writer and a pantser writer?
I think a pantser writer can get there. It just takes a lot
Mhm,
more work because the pantser
mhm.
has to get to the end first and then realize they have to change everything in the middle to get to the end.
God, that would frustrate me so much.
Mhm. Yeah. And
Alright.
there is the possibility that the pantser could, like, stumble upon whatever
Mhm,
through their pantsing, but
mhm.
that would be less rare and takes an exceptional subconscious, essentially.
It's either an exceptional subconscious or really knowing your characters. It would have to be someone who's a really, really
Mhm.
character driven writer,
Yeah,
I
and at
think.
the same time, like, if you're writing as a character-driven writer and you're in the mind of a somebody who's gonna lay plans, you're gonna
Mhm,
turn into somewhat of a planner anyways because of your character being a planner.
mhm. Yeah, that makes sense.
You're gonna trick yourself into being a planner.
Everybody should write an outline, plan your books, edit your books. It's important.
Editing, what is that?
Oh my god. So so I like Sarah J. Maas. I'll
Mm,
admit it. Um, I I feel like she sometimes gets you know, frowning from some of the more serious fantasy writers or readers, you know. But I enjoy it. But I tried to read Crescent City. I got like 8 hours into the audiobook before I had to stop because I was just like, 6 of these hours could have been cut from this book. I was like, if it's your first book in a series, it needs to be a tight story,
mhm,
because we need to know your characters before we care about random scenes that aren't really consequential to the plot, if that makes sense.
yeah,
So I'm like, I'm not going to read a 900-page book when I feel like two-thirds of it can be cut from your book,
yeah. I
you
think
know?
people can some I've heard some people criticize Sanderson, especially with the Stormlight Archive with that. I
Hmm.
don't agree with it. I think that it's all great, and a lot of the things that people say you can cut have more significance than you think, but
Mm.
that's my personal opinion. I love I enjoy if you can engage me as a
Hmm.
writer
Hmm.
for 900 pages, that's great. Because I think it's just people weren't engaged more than it being needed to be cut, if that makes any sense.
I would agree most of the time. I just wish I had felt like these scenes were going to pay off later,
Okay.
you know? Like if it's in there because there is going to be a legitimate payoff, then great, have it. Like I was reading an arc which I won't mention, but I ended up DNFing DNFing it because the first chapter is just info dumping about the world down to the tiniest minute details. And I'm like, those minute details better be important in your story later on.
Mhm.
Otherwise, why are they there?
Vibes,
Some
of
people
course.
vibes. I mean, some people love to see I want the whole scene set out for me down to what's on the plate. I'm like, no, I don't care.
Mhm. I also feel like can there there is a way to do that well, if that
Hmm.
makes any sense. There is a way to organically lay out a scenes that doesn't feel like an info dump.
Hmm.
And, like, if he's laying out the world, like, that's I feel like that's a classic blunder for a new writer to
Hmm.
literally tell the audience everything. And that's
Hmm.
something that I just, like, when I actually, like, finish anything, like, I wanna make sure I don't info dump because like, that's That's something that I tried to do when I was 12. I'm like, I'm gonna have a prologue that's gonna tell everything that the reader needs to know about this world and all these things, because like you get excited, you're creating something that's beautiful, and
Mhm.
it's your world and it's your baby, and you want to tell everybody about it. And I think it's the hardest thing to realize that your audience doesn't need all of that.
Mhm.
And it's almost
Yeah,
better if they don't know everything, because that means there's more for them to realize later.
exactly. I have been finding more and more that I really enjoy when the world building isn't info dumped
Mhm.
to me, and where I'm just kind of left floundering and have to figure out what's going on myself. Now I know that there are readers out there who don't enjoy that,
Yeah.
who want to have a clear understanding of the world, but I'm not that reader.
Mhm.
um, but I knew that this book in particular was a problem for me because the author said the main character does this thing every single time because of this reason, then proceeded to have a scene and said, "Oh yeah, they did that thing." And I'm like, "Why did you tell me they do that thing
And
instead of
then
just
have them do them. Yeah.
and then have them do them, but then just say, 'Oh yeah, they did that.'" It wasn't even like it didn't even get played out. It was just like, "Oh yeah, they did that."
Oh my, that's kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, if you had not done that and just showed me that that happens.
Show once instead of tell twice.
There we go. Sorry, I'm getting excited talking about books and we haven't even started sprinting.
It's just how it goes. That's what we have channels for.
That's true.
Why we made these channels. This is why we're on BookTube, to talk about books.
We're here to talk about books. So, hey gang, hi Greg. Um, that's what I said. um, that sounds familiar. I think he was saying that by let your character decide the story, which I'm not familiar with that at all, playing D&D. No.
Yeah.
I always feel like I'm the worst toxic player. That I have that uh the thing of, but I'm just doing what my character would do. That excuse. It's
Yeah.
the worst excuse, but I'm like,
It
but
is.
I am. I am just doing what my character would do.
I mean, if you have an understanding with your group, it's
Mhm,
okay. I
mhm,
have the capacity to be either like the worst what your character could do player, or like
mhm,
the worst metagamer ever. And I actually have to like turn off the metagamer all the time.
mhm, mhm.
Um, Metagaming and min maxing and stuff. Like I could totally be that person. I'm just like, stop. Why are you this way?
Whereas I am about as far from a min-maxer as you could possibly imagine. I'm all like, what's an interesting character I could play?
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
have
that's
to I have to I have to approach it like, hey, what would be funny and cool? And let's try to
Mhm,
take a spell or two that would like be interesting to do in role play. So I have to min max the role
mhm.
play. It's weird.
Oh yeah, I only ever take spells that make sense for my character.
Hmm.
I never take the spell just because it's the best spell, you know?
Yeah,
Like I'm actually starting a new campaign with Pete, not you, Pete, but
not
Pete in
me.
chat, Pete. And I'm playing a character, a Kalishtar with a warlock wizard, um, who speaks only through telepathy, and all of my spells are going to be divination based.
Nice.
So um, it's going to be fun. But oh, so Greg says, I like it when you just jump in as well and describe things that are different and unusual in more detail. So I think that's in reference to kind of our discussion on world building, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, don't
Yeah.
don't assume your readers are stupid. That's
Oh Lord, please don't do that. That's the worst
yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And certain info dumping does just come off like you think your readers are stupid, you know?
Yo, I showed you this thing. Let me explain it to you.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's like you have to trust that people you have to trust that people won't get it and be fine with that.
Mhm.
Like, there will be like, if you imply things, there are people that are not gonna get it. And I feel like you have to almost plan for that, is like, "Okay, I'm gonna try to set this up as much as possible, but what if
Mhm.
somebody doesn't get this? How bad can this be?" And I read a book recently that I did a review for, where the villain was supposed to be one thing, and it ended up looking like a kinda like a harmful stereotype of a certain type of people, and I was like, "That's kinda what?" And the author, like, came back, was like, "No, no, no, it was supposed to be this," and I'm like, "Oh, it didn't come off as that." And part of it was I felt like there was like, I can see where the pieces were, but
Mhm.
part of me wants to think, was it me that just didn't get it, or was it just, like, the sympathy for this villain just wasn't built up at all? And I think that's part of it. It was just, like, you didn't have any sympathy for the villain, and the specific traits slash instances of things were certain things were stressed when other things should have been stressed and shown
Mm.
more, and it
Mm.
just didn't come across to me as well. So I think, like, you have to by info dumping, you sometimes assume your audience is stupid, but you also have to plan for them to be stupid, but in a different way, in order to be like, okay, how can this come across?
Right. Right. It's all about clarity, right? You're
Mhm,
the first and foremost it should be is what you're telling clear to the reader.
mhm, yeah.
Um and that I think that's the key. Greg says only explain things in the last chapter. What do you think about that?
It can work. Actually, that'd be a very interesting, like, literary experiment. Like, if you created a fantasy novel and
Mhm.
only actually described it in full in the very last chapter,
Mhm.
and, like, only had very vague descriptions or dialogue, and then in the very last chapter, the entire book opens up and you see you could see the entire world. Like, that'd be so cool if you, like, in the got to the last chapter, the world was described, and then you see everything in a completely different light.
Mm.
That would actually be like, readability on that book would be crazy, but
Yeah.
rereadability
Yeah.
at least.
It would be interesting. It would be an interesting writing experiment, if nothing else.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I think it's maybe time to do some sprints. What do you think?
Sounds about right.
All right. Um, uh, Pete and Greg, if you are reading, let us know in the chat what you're reading. I think we're going to start with 45 minutes. That sound good?
It sounds good.
All right. I will add the timer and take out my headphones so we can hear the ding when it goes off.
I'm probably gonna take off my headphones, so
And let's read. Hello, hello. I was like, I didn't want to unshare my screen. Hello?
Sorry,
Oh,
I'm back. My headphones just turned on.
welcome back.
Welcome back.
So those of you that have joined us since the last sprint, welcome. Let us know in the comments. Let us know in the comments what you're currently reading. And those of you that have been here since the beginning, let us know what you did during our sprint and how you got on. So Pete, how did you do with your book?
I got a good 40 or so pages done.
40?
Something like that.
Dang, you read fast. That's like almost a page a minute.
Yep.
I mean,
it's a mass market paperback, and the prose in this goes pretty fast.
Okay. I am not that fast of a reader. I read about 14 pages.
It works though. You got it done.
Yeah, I did. Well, and I would have gotten more done, except my roommate was trying to print out item cards for her D&D campaign that she was leaving for. So I was dealing with that.
That happens. That's exactly why you didn't get 40 pages. You would have gotten another,
Oh yeah.
26 if it hadn't been for that.
Yeah, in those 10 minutes.
Gosh,
I would
you
have
just
gotten 40 more. Yeah, I've always been a slow reader, but I'll say like my comprehension is usually really good.
That's good. Yeah. My comprehension is decent. It's probably not the best, but especially in these books, like it feels like you're just want to get through. It's like you want to get through it in a good way, right? You just want to. What's next? What's next? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Happening. Tell me more. Let's go. What's coming next?
Right. That's how I digest audiobooks. Like I can read audiobooks like I'm not one of those people who can read it at like 5 times speed. I don't know how people listen that fast.
They make their ears go burr.
I definitely read more at like the 1.5 mark, between 1.25 and 1.5, because I usually find the 1 speed is a little too slow for me, then my mind trails off.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's kind of how I digest audiobooks, is I'm just like, oh, what happens next and what happens next? And whereas physical reading for me is much more immersive.
Yeah.
In a way, it's I get, yeah, I only read 16 pages, but like I felt every single one of those 16 pages.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I can't do audiobooks, because I feel like my reading comprehension goes down a lot when I listen to an audio versus when I'm reading. And I want to know what I've read. While I am not, yeah, that's pretty much it.
No, I get that. So I am not an auditory learner at all. I mean, part of that is the ADHD life. You have to focus on it, and I'm not great at that. But I have gotten better, and I've actually found that audiobooks has helped my active listening more.
Mhm.
In a way, that I am able to pay a bit more attention, but at the same time, when I'm doing like listening to audiobooks, I'm always doing something else.
Yeah.
Like I very rarely just sit there and listen to audiobooks, because if I do, I usually fall asleep.
Yeah. Or your mind goes somewhere else.
Or my mind goes somewhere else. So it's like I love listening to them, like when I'm cleaning or when I'm driving. It's nice in that way. It's similar to listening to a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely listen to podcasts, but a lot of times with podcasts, I listen to ones that I can, if I trail off and I'm doing something in the middle and my brain trails off away from the podcast and I come back to it, I'm not like super confused.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I haven't found that happening, although I'm currently listening to, like I told you before we started streaming, I'm currently listening to the 5th season, and
Mhm.
I do find I have to listen a lot more carefully to that one, just
Yeah.
because it's a very literary writing style. Um, but, um
When you say it's a literary writing style, what do you mean by that?
okay, so, like, all writing is literature, right? But
Yes.
I'm talking, like, you can tell sometimes I would say that, oh, what is his name? I know his last name is Vandermeer.
Jeff?
He write Jeff Vandermeer, yeah.
Okay.
I would I would say his writing style is very, like, literary sci-fi, like, there's a certain, like, extra attention
Mhm.
paid to the craft of the words that are on the page, if that makes sense, rather than just storytelling, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Mhm.
So it's a very specific type to me. When I say like something like literary sci-fi or literary fantasy, that's the kind of feel that I'm talking about. It's just an extra level of attention to the specific words on the page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you classify have you read Name of the Wind?
I have not. um I'm
I'd
kind
be
of opposed because I know the series will never be finished.
I'd be interested if you were to read Name of the Wind, which honestly you could
Mhm,
if you're fine with leaving it, you could read
mhm.
the first one and be fine because of course the first one is the better of them. Um, I would be interested to see if you got the impression that Name of the Wind was literary fantasy because I've read I've also read fifth season
Mhm.
and I don't necessarily I don't know I it's more just the word literary, right? The words literary, the word prose, which I
Mhm.
literally just used. They're so nebulous, and I feel like they're very specific. There's just very specific. People have very specific definitions in their own minds that don't always line up with um, what everybody else thinks about what that means. If that makes any sense.
No, yeah, I would agree with that for sure. For me, like when I talk about literary, it's more like I can tell they're experimenting with the written language a bit more,
Mhm.
you know? Um, and that's when I think of like literature, I think
Yeah.
that those people do it's about innovative writing and experimenting with the written word in unique and unusual ways,
Yeah. Okay.
you know? That's for me anyway. That's my definition. What's your definition of literary?
I don't have one.
You don't have one.
I don't. I
You
haven't.
just don't like the word in general?
I would say I am more curious about the word more than anything. It's just like I've become more comfortable with using the word prose over time. I still don't feel like I have a solid definition for it. Literary, I definitely don't have a definition for it and don't feel comfortable using it because of that. I'm more just I'm curious about them as words and concepts, and I'm working to see if I can define them for myself and come across general definitions amongst people
Mm,
because there's a difference between reading the definition on, Webster's dictionary or something, or even learning it.
mhm,
I haven't learned it from a classroom. I mean, I was an accounting major. Like, I didn't take English.
mhm.
I mean, I took one English class in community college, but that was to get through it rather than to actually do anything with it. Um, but it's just, I don't know. Ideas and concepts fascinate me. So like the concept, like when people talk about things like the one that I want to do a video about soon is the concept of what do people mean when they say nothing happened in a book? Because
I have
that's not
definitely said
consistent
that in
either,
some reviews. Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not a consistent definition either. So
Mhm.
what do people mean by that? Exactly. So that's the recent brain tick I've had, whatever you want to call
Right.
it.
I would say for me, like when I say like nothing happened in the book, I would say that I either found it unsatisfying on a character arc level or on a plot
Hmm.
arc level, or both, you
Hmm.
know? Usually for me, because I prefer very character driven. And I know like I know that there are people out there who, everybody's like, oh, everybody likes character driven writing. And that's
Eh,
true, but, like, some people do prefer a good plot over interesting characters, you know?
mhm. Yeah,
Um
there's there's a certain template that I've come across once or twice, or a
Mhm,
couple times in the past few months in a certain type of book, a certain character template where I'm like, I feel like I've read about you before, and I basically have. And to a certain extent, I like reading about that template because I think there's some interesting things that could be said about the worlds that those template characters are placed in, essentially.
mhm.
Um, but they're
Well, because
useful lenses.
yeah. Well, and let's face it, there isn't really such a thing as a truly unique character, right? We're all just
Aha.
mixing and combining character archetypes, right?
In a general sense, you could say that, yeah.
Mhm. Um, because we're all essentially writing from our own experiences and, um shaped by what we personally think. And so I feel like archetypes and cliches,
Mhm.
you know, are just kind of like ingrained into us. And it's about I lost my train of thought.
You're good.
My brain just went, I looked at the chat and then I got distracted. So let's look at the chat. Hello, Moni Chan. I don't know why I always do that, but I'm like, hi. Scared you? Did the timer scare you? What scared you? I'm curious. Did your
Probably the
book scare
timer.
you? Um,
I would assume the timer.
I would assume the timer too. Moni Chan is reading Starless Sea.
Question is,
Um,
how are you liking it? Because I've
yes,
heard
how are you
different things
liking it?
depending on what
Because
part of the book you're in.
I
You ever
haven't
have
read Starless Sea yet, but
neither have I. You ever have those books that you know so much about and you've never read it? Where it's like I know the vague like I don't know like what actually happens in the book, but I know like I think it's like the first half or the first third of the book is really good, and then it falls
Mhm.
off, is what I've heard consistently, or
Mm.
something along those lines. I could be wrong or getting mixed up, but like, do you ever have a book like that where like you know the emotional beats from people's vague ramblings?
Oh, absolutely. Akatar. I have never read Akatar.
Yep, like the book everybody has read, but not really.
Right. I was like, I have not read it. Um, and what's funny is like I hear people talk about it, and I was like, is this just rebranded Anne Bishop?
Basically,
Because it
yeah,
sounds a lot like it. a lot. But
yeah. The only thing you need to watch is just Alan's vlog of reading Akatar, and that's all you need to know about that book.
okay. I mean, I'll end up reading it because I'll like my primary genre is that genre. I like
Yeah.
the kind of YA new adult fantasy with romance, or paranormal romance is also like a
Mhm.
genre I really love. So like I'm definitely kind of in that niche, but I'm not in that niche because I've also consciously been trying to become a more omnivorous reader, you know?
Yeah.
But like if I'm trying to get myself out of a reading slump, I fall back into those genres really quickly.
Yeah.
All right. Moni-chan says ADHD reader here too. There's not too many of us, I feel. Reading is not a typical ADHD hobby. I would agree to um to a point because it does involve a lot of sitting and being still,
Mhm.
right?
I think
um
it really depends on when you started reading. I think if you can learn to be engrossed from a young age as a young child, even
Mhm,
ADHD kids will take to it because it's something that's ingrained into them as a child and is something
mhm.
that can engage them as a small child.
I would definitely agree with that, especially since people with ADHD tend to have much higher levels of empathy. So
Mm,
you will naturally empathize with the characters in the story more, which makes it a very emotionally kind of both simultaneously emotionally rewarding and emotionally draining at the same time,
and
depending on the
yeah,
story.
and most of the time it'll be mentally engaging as well to
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, like I was in the story that I was reading, um, the short story is called Better Than Home. And it was, I've really been enjoying this short story anthology simply from like what I love about the horror genre is they can really dig into topics that are maybe slightly more faux pas in
Mm,
regular other genres. Like this short story is all from the perspective of someone who is pretty strongly on the spectrum.
mm,
And they never say that, but the story itself and the characters' behaviors, like it all, you're just like reading this story, and I was just like automatically like, my heart is breaking for this kid because of what they're going through and
yeah.
their lack of ability to express that, even though we're reading it and he's expressing it very clearly in his head, but it's in a way that makes sense to him and not the people around him,
Yeah. I
you know?
think yeah, and I think the wider wider literary literature community, the community of all genres is getting more okay with that sort of thing. I think specifically
Mhm,
fantasy for me has gotten it
mhm,
more. I've seen more of that sort of representation where I think so. The of course there's a character in Stormlight Archive who's autistic,
mhm,
but there is also a book called Dragon Mage that was self-published that I read where one of the main characters is autistic, and I think she did an excellent job because you have the main character and then you have the main character's best friend, and
mhm,
that is kind of when you kind of figure out, oh yeah, this guy's feels autistic. Because
mhm,
honestly, when you start reading the first chapter or two, it feels kind of like cringy fantasy, and this is going to be typical cringy fantasy with um, characters that don't necessarily always make sense. And then you get into the perspective of the friend, and everything shifts in such a subtle way, and you realize, oh, this guy thinks that way in a way that doesn't make sense to me because he's on the spectrum, and it seems pretty obvious
mhm,
he's on the spectrum from the outside of his thought process as well.
mm. So what do you mean by cringy fantasy as we're talking definitions?
Belgariad, I would classify as cringy typical
I
fantasy.
I loved Belgariad in high school.
I read it in college, and I think I was like, wow, I feel like I've read this story before. And I also feel like the logic in a lot of these characters' decisions doesn't really make sense, but I know why they're
Mm,
making these decisions because I know where the story is going.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, I haven't reread it since
hmm,
high school, but I just remember enjoying it. I think it was a case of I enjoyed the character archetypes. I recognized
mhm,
that they were archetypes for sure because it was a Lord of the Rings tribute, you
yeah.
know, type
Back in the day
story.
when that's all that fantasy people wrote was the Lord of
Right.
the Rings.
Right. Lord of the Rings reskinned, right?
Basically, yeah.
Well, I mean, what is D&D? Lord of the Rings reskinned.
I
It's gotten
mean,
less so. It's gotten less so with all the added stuff,
I
but
can make an argument that it's not.
oh, okay.
Yes. It's Lord of the Rings and role playing. In fact, I could probably point you to the person that could make an argument better than I could. His AP Canavan. I'm pretty sure his dissertation for his PhD was on D&D and the role-playing genre of games and their influence on the fantasy genre.
Mm,
But they're separate but close, right? Like if you look at
mhm,
Tolkien, you actually see almost a typical D&D party in the Fellowship.
mhm,
But they're separate because there was a lot of it's complicated. One, you have the war games influence, right? You have the war
mhm,
games influence that turned into whatever, but you also have the heroic journey um, influence, which is I would say the hero's journey is primarily something that comes from D&D, not from
mhm,
Tolkien,
mm.
because I feel like Tolkien was trying to tell a different story than a hero's journey um,
I feel like
in Lord of the
Hero's
Rings.
Journey has stronger roots in, like, Arthurian legends,
Mhm.
like that
Very,
romantic Arthurian.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's an argument I probably could make more if I did a little bit more research, but it's something that I think they're separate but combined influences, if that makes any sense. Like they have influences on
Yes.
each other, or they had influences on each other, but Tolkien is not the complete only progenitor of fantasy.
Mhm. Yeah. I once read a really interesting, anthology that was, like, short stories that influenced Lord of the Rings and his
Mhm.
writing of the Lord of the Rings. So it's, like, a lot of stories about, like, the Fae, but not like the way we think of the Fae now, but, like, the old
The fun stuff,
foreboding
fun
Fae.
thing.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
the Elfkind in Germany, like the dark stuff.
yeah. You got your Celtic and Scottish and Germanic myths, just like
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
See, that's why, like, things like ACOTAR and stuff, I'm like, I wish they were more my speed because that
Mhm.
back like, ACOTAR and then parts of, Cassandra Clare's universe with the Fae stuff. Like, I
Mhm.
want more of that specific type of world building, like, I want more Fae influences on the world building because I think the Fae can be a really interesting element of world building, especially if you lean really hard into it.
Mhm.
But it has been co-opted. That type of world is very heavily associated with the YA
Mhm.
new adult romance scene nowadays, and I'm sad because I would rather somebody else that's something that I would like to read a lot more,
Mhm.
would write something in.
Yeah. I would say one of the better, like, YA series that embraces, like, the darkness of the Fae was actually, like, the series that was popular before, ACOTAR, which was, it's by, I wanna say Melissa Marr, the Wicked Lovely series.
Okay.
And that definitely goes into, like, more of the traditional, like, Fae courts and, like, the politics of it. It's still very much that YA new A
Yeah.
or
Looks like it from the
YA,
covers.
yeah, but, it definitely is a bit more on the darker side. But, I
Mhm.
mean, I would read a regular epic fantasy that deals with, Fae court stuff.
What I would love to see is somebody like I haven't read any Joe Abercrombie, but I would like to see
I
somebody like Joe Abercrombie, somebody grimdark, take the Fae and run with it,
mm,
and do a Fae court story. I
yeah.
think that would be amazing, and I think it would be very interesting to see how it sells and who it sells to.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I think the issue is, like, when you're trying to do that grim dark thing, like, these are immortal creatures. So
Mhm,
you're not gonna have that constant fear of death without that, like, portal fantasy aspect of it, of, like,
mhm.
an outsider being drawn into this, if that makes
That's
sense.
true. Yeah. I got a little bit of taste for what I wish we could do. Wish what I got a little bit of taste for it in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell,
Mhm.
because that's got some huge phase stuff in it, but it's still told from the perspective of humans and magicians trying to rediscover magic. So we really only get teases of what I really want to see.
I have yet to read any Susanna Clark. I've been meaning to, though.
It's good. She's really good. I wish we could get a sequel, but I think it's very unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
All right, well,
mind basic high fantasy. Some of it is cringy, some of it is not. This is a
I like
very
both.
interesting question.
Oh, is there such a thing as a good plot without any character arc?
It's possible, but it's high level.
Yeah, it's high level interesting plot versus you know, and like a constant example. I would almost say like it's the difference between playing. I'm gonna just pull in lots of D&D because we're here. It's like the difference between playing like a pre-written campaign with a party that's just like, let's just accomplish the goals and do the things, versus what I like to call your frustrated theater kids playing D&D, who are all about like, let's drop our characters into this world and see what happens.
Yeah.
Which I know Greg will know because he has DM'd me in Cursive Strahd. And we are definitely of the later category.
Frustrated theater kids.
Yeah, well, let's just put it this way. We had all neutral party, right?
Mhm.
All neutral party, and well, minus Pete while he played with us. He was technically good. But all neutral party, and by the time we finally met Strahd, he thanked us.
Nice. Nothing like contributing to the rule of somebody who's interesting, like Strahd.
Well, and it was just more of everybody in that world is terrible, so we're like just not like invested in helping them.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so Moni with Starless Sea, I like it. I'm 2/3 in and honestly like the second half better. In the first
Okay.
half, the characters had very little agency. Oh, that's the worst.
Interesting. So I think, if I remember correctly, the first half was the most like more like the Night Circus, where it was mostly vibes, probably. Which Night Circus was awesome. If you want, I
I
mean,
have
there's
it
a
on my TBR. My TBR is now 2,500 books long.
That makes sense. Yeah, I don't have a list because it would be something like that.
Well, I will forget any book that I wanted to read if I don't track it somehow.
My philosophy now is if it's a good enough book for me to eventually read it, it's gonna pop up again. I probably will
That's
remember a lot of them. Every once in a while, there are ones that I'm like, I want to remember this, so I'm gonna put it on the TBR, because they consistently pop up. I'm like, I'll just put it on the TBR, or put it on like a list I have somewhere, or buy it or something. But for now, like my TBR is this.
All right. Have you read Infinite Jest? The
I've
title sounds really familiar.
It's trippy. I have started it twice. I'm working on getting through it. It is a train ride through acid. It's
Who writes it?
David Foster Wallace. It's very literary, for certain, is what it's described as. It is what is called a postmodern encyclopedic novel. He throws a lot of information at you. A lot of the themes include addiction and consumerism and some other crazy stuff, and it's really, really intense.
Yeah, I definitely have not. That hasn't really been on my radar. Just looking at the cover, I was like,
it's also something that's not meant to be read linearly. So he has 100 pages of footnotes or endnotes that constantly pop up, and like they're not useless. They're actually very interesting, but sometimes it's like, hi, we're gonna like reference a conversation, and then there's an endnote, and in the endnote is that entire conversation from like 2 weeks ago. Or we're going to give you some backstory. Oh, yeah, so his father committed suicide. End note. Here is his father's entire filmography career, as if it was like a wiki article or something.
Wow, that would drive me crazy as a reader. Yeah.
It's amazing. I love it in the most chaotic way possible.
Okay. I used to be the least reading person in my big family. Only last year I went from 4 books to 40 books a year because I found reading on the phone and library reading with the time limits works for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I started my channel. I
Yeah.
hadn't read for like 7 years since I graduated college. And then I was just like, I need a creative outlet. And two, I was like, I want to start reading again because I had all these books that I've collected over the years that I haven't
Right?
even touched, you know? And
Yeah.
I wanted a way to keep myself accountable, you know?
Yeah. So I got out of college, started living in DC, and I had disposable income and very little to do with it, and I didn't want to drink. So I started buying books that I always wanted. Like I started collecting a bunch of Star Wars books, and then I was like, "Oh, that fantasy book sounds nice." Oh, I started reading that fantasy book when I was younger, or in college, and just like in college, there was like 3 or 4 different really big fantasy series that I started or was
Mhm.
going to start, but never finished them, DNF them, just because college was overwhelming. So I started just buying up books and more books, and I found BookTube, and when I found BookTube is when my reading pace actually picked up,
Mhm.
which was great. So BookTube helped me get my reading pace up.
I mean, it definitely was one of the things that got me thinking, oh, you haven't read in a really long time.
Exactly.
Was, I kind of fell upon BookTube, but then I
Yeah.
was like, I like this. I'm liking the vibes. They're chill vibes here, you know?
Yeah. I think, like a lot of people, it was probably some random Daniel Green video popped across my dash, and I was like, "Oh, it's a dude talking about books."
Mhm.
And then he had a friend on his channel that also talks about books. And wait, there's more of them? And then I found some other people, and I'm like, "Whoa, there's this whole ecosystem within YouTube that I didn't know about."
Yeah. For me, it was with Cindy.
Mhm.
She's the one who kind of pulled me in. And then I discovered Daniel Green, and he's hilarious.
Yes.
Um, all right. Disagree. I don't know
I
what
think
we're
it had to
disagreeing on.
do with, oh my gosh, I, like, thought about it.
Probably about, it was probably related to Dungeons and Dragons
Oh,
being
yeah, it was
influenced by
the
Lord of the Rings.
yeah. Those influences.
Yeah. All right. Nice reading with you too, Greg. I know you're gone already,
Maverick.
but all right. You've already responded to this comment.
Oh, so Pete, you're writing basic high fantasy.
Yeah, so Pete has quite a few novels that you can get. Um, I haven't read any of them. I'm sorry, Pete.
I want to know what they are because I'm interested.
All right, I'll I'll
Um,
I'll I'll let you know. Unless he wants to share it in chat, I'll let you know afterwards.
I haven't read any Piers Anthony.
Terry Brooks.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can understand where he's going. I can
Mhm,
enjoy a good high fantasy book, but I think it's a
mhm.
different level of enjoyment for most of my other stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, like I've currently been struggling through, and I say struggling. I am enjoying it. I've been reading The Wheel of Time.
mhm.
I finished the first book. It took me 5 months.
I can understand that. I had to force myself through something. I read it a few months ago, and I want to get
Mhm,
to the rest of the series, but I think I'm going to finish Realm of the Elderlings before I do.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, I, I I've already read it once before, so like I was familiar enough to know that, oh, there's going to be something at the end, and it's fine.
mhm.
So
Yeah, I have started The Great Hunt, and I'm already it's going a little faster for me than it normally would. But I kind of sidetracked it to move to this because library book.
Makes sense.
um,
You know, I have a few books that I need to get on, but
I couldn't read Foster till years into
faster,
adult. Faster. Okay.
I think. I can understand that. I think there are definitely books that I've come across that have hit differently as an adult,
Mhm.
and I'm more interested in them as an adult, as well as books that I know that if I read when I was younger, I wouldn't have liked them.
100%. Great example for me is House on the Cerulean Sea.
Mhm.
I would have hated that when I was younger, but I
Yeah.
loved it as an adult. And it's funny too, like when you're a YA reader like I am, you start reading things as your perspective as you get older, and you just go, why are you doing this? Oh God, this is so stupid. you know?
Yeah, there was this whole, what was it? So, back in the day, I read Cassandra Clare, I read, Throne of Glass, I read Vampire Diaries. And even when I was in college, I was reading them because I was like, "Oh, this sounds interesting."
Right.
And even then, I could see an evolution of me going from, "Oh, this is interesting, sort of, but I'm frustrated by all the weird stuff going on, like the whole weird incest stuff in the Cassandra Clare first 3 books or whatever, and some other stuff that it is, it isn't, it is, it is." Oh my gosh, that was even as a high schooler, I was like, "This is why are you doing this?"
Yeah, that was me. And so Vampire Diaries by far is my least favorite LJ Smith series.
It wasn't Vampire Diaries, it was Vampire
Oh,
Academy.
oh, Vampire Academy. I haven't read Vampire Academy. I just
It
knew it wasn't gonna be my thing.
I tried. I got like 4 books in, and then she ran off to Russia to go after her undead boyfriend, question mark. And I didn't want her to do that. I wanted them to actually figure out the politics, because the vampire world politics of that world was like from the first book. I was like,
Mhm,
"Oh, this is interesting. Tell me more." Every book, "Can
mhm,
you please tell me more? Can you please tell me more?" And
mhm.
evidently, I think the last book is when they actually like really get heavily into the vampire politics.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's funny because LJ Smith is an author that I loved in like middle school, early high school.
Mhm.
And that is the series that I love and is never going to be finished.
Like the author or you?
The author.
The author's never gonna finish it?
Mm-mm. She has a series called Night World that I loved. And she was on the last book of the series. And this was it was supposed to be released in 1999.
Oh my.
It is now 2022.
Oh my. That's like, oh my people talk about George and Patrick and
Right. Now, like, she has like really good reasons for not publishing it,
okay, so it's not a
but
frustration that people have with those 2.
no, I don't think she legitimately can at this point.
Okay. That's kinda where
So,
I'm at with, getting a sequel to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Like, it's a
mhm,
complete book, and it works really well as a standalone, but it's one
mhm,
of those books that leaves things open in a, "Hey, there could be a sequel for this later,"
mhm,
while wrapping up the main stuff.
mhm,
So, there could definitely be a sequel, and I know the author's talked about a sequel, but because of how her health is, she she is not physically capable of writing as in-depth a book as that book, as it is, because,
mhm.
like, it is, uh oh, I have stuff behind it.
It's massive.
It's
It's
a
like this
massive
thick,
book.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's thick, it's a brick, you could build some houses in Africa with it type of deal. Like, it's and it's so in depth with the time period that it takes, because it's a Regency era book that really plays into that style of writing,
Mhm.
and really mimics it. It plays homage to it and that time period, as well as giving you this background of history, because it's like, hi, we're in Regency era England, but what if magic was real and had a huge involvement in how society developed and how it was, but guess what, it's not here anymore, it went away. So
Mm,
how is that? So it's just a very in-depth book that she couldn't put in the work for consistently. And
mm.
it's sad, but like I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Yeah, this was it basically, because 1999, millennium, end of the world, cataclysmic
Yay.
event, you finished before the last book. So it's like we have like the whole thing is like they're trying to find like four very specific people who can put an end to basically the apocalypse, right? And so we end it. They have found three of them. We're
And
supposed
they
to
need
find
to
the.
find a fourth.
They need to find the fourth. So it's just, it would have been amazing if it had been released right before the millennium. But now I just don't, with her memory and issues, I just don't think it's ever going to happen.
Yeah,
Uh, Blue by Piers Anthony was great. I haven't read it.
neither have I.
Sorry, Pete. Other Pete.
Other Pete.
David
Um,
Eddings was hard to read when I was younger too.
I didn't actually discover him, I think, until high school.
Yeah,
And
I
then
read
that's
him in high school. I also didn't read Lord of the Rings until high school. I had tried to read The Hobbit as a kid and then just fell off.
yeah. Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are very formational for me.
The Lord of the Rings movies were like epic for me,
Yeah.
but over caffeinated nerd. Hello, how are you?
Hello.
I hope you are doing well. All right, I probably have time for a shorter sprint, like maybe 20-ish minutes.
Sure.
All right, sounds good. So, over caffeinated nerd, what are you reading? I do not have a timer for this, so I'm just gonna set my phone, if that's okay.
That works.
Hi, Bixby. Set a timer for 20 minutes. All right, see you in 20 minutes. Timer for 20 minutes. Okay. That went by so much faster.
It did.
How'd it go?
Probably got another 15 pages or so done.
Dear Lord. So fast.
I'm it's like in the middle of a battle, so like that just keeps going and going and going and going.
Well, I finished the short story I had been reading, and it broke my heart. It was so sad.
Yay.
And then I actually just started the short story version of The Black Phone.
Nice.
You know, the reason I'm reading the book. So, Overcaffeinated Nerd, how is Last Argument of Kings going?
What do I have? I have the blade itself, and before they are hanged. I have no idea when I'm actually going to get to them, though.
I know. I feel like I had some Joe Abercrombie books for a really long time in high school. Well, and then all my entire book collection got destroyed. So
Sadness.
yeah, I put them in my parents' attic. Did not know that there was a moisture problem in my parents' attic.
No.
Yeah, so they're like gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
My mom
heard
gets
great
concerned
things.
with all these books.
Why?
My mom gets concerned with all these books that my room is a fire hazard.
Oh. I mean,
She's not wrong per se.
I mean, I definitely have a candle lit right here.
Unfortunately, I don't use candles. I just got to make sure not to accidentally leave a light on and have that light up against flammable things so it gets too super hot or whatever.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. Are you like me and no overhead lighting?
Yeah, I don't use my overhead light because I don't like the light bulb in it, and it's just too much. I usually use lamps.
Yeah, right now I have nothing but just sun coming in this window here. So, which is real interesting because it's definitely thunderstorming right now. So I don't know how it's still so light. It's like
Happens.
tornado weather.
That's hilarious. Yeah, no, I have two windows, one of which is mostly blocked by a bookshelf and one of which is half blocked by a bookshelf.
I mean, I don't think I could do that. The A type in me would be like, you're blocking a window. I can't even put my bed, like my headboard, in front of a window.
Yeah, that would be weird. My my old room at my parents' house, my parents did that. They got a double bed and they put the head. They might have moved it. No, they didn't. But they put the head of the bed right underneath this double window in my room, and it's notwithstanding that it's just different from how I had it when I was living there, but it is kind of weird to have the headboard at the window.
Well, I mean, this is like my primary book collection because I've taken, since I lived abroad for 2 years, I've taken slightly more minimalist towards my book collecting. So it's like you see like the kind of quasi rainbow shelves I have going on are my TBR, because it doesn't matter that a series is split up if I haven't read it.
See, that's like the one rule I have is I try to keep series together. And that's the only rule I have in any of this chaos. That's it.
Well, you know, I think I only have two books on here that are part of the same series anyway. So
versus I have like multiple, like there's Malazan, which is 10 books. Well, it's not technically 10 books. Malazan, Book of the Fallen is 10 books, and then you have the other 20 other 15 books. You have Wheel of Time is somewhere. Shadows of the Apt is 10 books. I think that's it for the crazy ones. I don't keep Realm of the Elderlings together, which is surprising. But those are technically, you could split those up into sub-series.
Yeah. I only really have like 3/4 of a shelf of books that I'm like, I know I'm going to be keeping no matter what. Because I have this rule, like the only physical books that I keep are my 5-star reads now.
Nice.
Since I'm essentially building my collection from scratch, you know. because I lost all the ones that I used to have,
Yeah.
including a massive manga collection. I had a
Oh
massive manga
wow.
collection, and they're all gone. Like I had like
No.
2 full bookcases worth of manga.
That is tragic.
Yeah, it was really awful.
Oh wow.
All right.
Don't trust parents, addicts. Got it.
Or at least put your books in a waterproof, airtight container.
At the very least.
At the very least. Overcaffeinated Nerd read 14 pages and is currently in the middle of lots of political drama. I heard Joe Abercrombie is good at that.
And torture.
Oh, good to know. Manga is so expensive to replace as well. Yeah, like when I first started collecting it, manga was typically running about $10 a volume. And I know that it's a lot more expensive now, from what I hear.
Yeesh. Even $10 a volume in a whole entire bookcase. I'm like, that's at least $500 right there.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a lot. It was a lot. And I had some good series that you can't get anymore.
Oof.
Like my favorite manga was actually a Korean series called Bride of the Water God. And it's, like your typical kind of portal fantasy, but based very strongly on a traditional Korean folk tale.
Mhm.
And I had like the first 10 volumes, and it's some of the most gorgeous artwork I've ever seen, because that's what really will draw me to a manga is the quality of the art.
Mhm.
And they never finished publishing it because the company that was publishing it went out of business,
Oh no.
which happens very frequently with manga translating companies. So,
Mhm.
Lisai.
Basically, yeah.
All right. Well, this was fun. I unfortunately have to wrap it up for the day because I have to go to work in like 20 minutes.
Yay.
Yay, fun. And I probably should eat something before then.
That is recommended, especially if you're going to deal with small children, you want to have a good stomach.
Yes, yes. But this was fun.
Yes,
I will definitely probably be planning on doing more sprints more frequently. So would love to have you join again. Of course, if you aren't familiar with Pete, which chances are you're here probably because of Pete more than me. You're like, I don't know. I do have your channel linked in my description box. So check that out, and I will see you guys next time. Bye. And now comes the awkward waiting for the broadcast to end.
Waving until it ends.
I don't think it's over yet.
It's not. It doesn't say not live to me. I mean, did you hit it twice?
I did hit the button.
StreamYard just wants to see how long we will wave.
Yes, having trouble connecting. Please check your internet connection.